Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
So the president weighed in himself on the prospect of impeachment. Here's what he said.
And Nancy said, we're not looking to impeach you. I said, that's good, Nancy, that's good. But you know what? You don't impeach people when they're doing a good job. And you don't impeach people when there was no collusion, because there was no collusion.
So from a Republican perspective, Kayleigh, first, we should note that someone who's doing a good job still can be impeached. But I'm curious about his take on Nancy Pelosi. Do Republicans believe she does not plan to go after impeachment, or are they preparing for that possibility?
Well, I think you have to prepare for it when you have Representative Sherman, a Democrat, already introducing articles of impeachment. You know, Nancy Pelosi and Democrats have said this is not something they want. I hope they're serious about that because there is no base for impeachment. I think it would be an incredibly wrong-headed move, especially if they're looking at any sort of polling. A Rasmussen poll I'll give as an example in November said 68% want the new Democratic majority to legislate and find areas of compromise and not to go down the impeachment road. You'd be on the wrong side of voters. We can get a lot done here for the American people. Paid family leave. Americans deserve that. It's in two of Trump's budgets. Let's focus on that and not baseless calls for impeachment.
Look, I'm going to up even more recently than Rasmussen. You have the Political Harvard poll, which shows it being like number 20 on the list of what people want to have this Congress focus upon. But Kurt, what is your take on the president's remarks that we heard right there? Do you think he should be worried more about impeachment?
Well, he certainly should be worried more than any other president in recent history. And when you look at the fact that the Mueller report is still going to be out there, we don't know the totality of what he has found, and we can't make any judgments about whether he's innocent or guilty or whether there was collusion or not until that report is revealed. And then there can be an appropriate conversation about what the consequences should be. I do think what's also important to realize is that there was just an election. The American people overwhelmingly supported the idea of having checks and balances, a check on this president. They support the idea of having oversight over the executive branch. And when you look at the leadership at these investigative committees in Congress now, like Elijah Cummings and my old stomping grounds at oversight, they're not talking about impeachment. They're talking about having legitimate oversight and investigations into wrongdoing in the government that we know has existed, that we know is going on, and that should be rooted out. That should be exposed. And Republicans, for the better part of this decade, were all about oversight up until Donald Trump became president.
But Kayleigh, the president seems to be numb to that which is happening to those 800,000 individuals. Should he have more concern for them as individuals? Is he missing something?
I think he does have concern for these federal employees. It's why he chose to stay in the Oval Office over the break while Nancy Pelosi was in Hawaii. It's why when he was asked yesterday, he said, hey, landlords, you should go easy on these people. They're a victim and a casualty of the Democrats. We need Democrats to come together and realize the facts that in fiscal year 2017 and 18, 205,000 criminals were apprehended within the interior. 3,000 who had homicide charges. That's a big deal.
Is this more about the president being concerned about the 800,000 individuals, or as Senator Lindsey Graham said, that if he gives in, this is going to be the end of his presidency?
It's being concerned about the citizens of our country, all of them, federal employees included. But when you have Officer Ronald Singh, who lost his life in California the day after Christmas to an individual with known gang ties who shouldn't have been in this country if not for sanctuary laws, we have a problem. We have to care about those Americans, too, that have been victims whose names are rarely mentioned on the airwaves.
What about all the people who have been shot and murdered by white Americans in this country? Where's the concern for Homeland Security and for law enforcement when people are getting killed in this country by guns every day and there's mass gun violence? violence in this country. I don't see Republicans doing anything about that. I don't see Trump calling. I don't see Trump talking about a national emergency when so many people are being murdered by American citizens with guns. That is a huge,
proving my
huge
point.
problem.
You don't want to talk about the Americans who
going on
lost
at
their
the border.
lives.
There's a bigger problem than any of the.
False.
Every time that a crime is committed by an illegal immigrant or someone that's not white, Republicans cannot wait to talk about it. But when a crime is committed by someone with a gun, a white guy with a gun, it's crickets from Republicans. It's shameful. It is disgusting.
It's incredible. I mentioned the name of an officer who lost his life. It triggers you. You clearly did not want to address the situation that happened in California.
How about all of the people who got killed in Vegas?
What about Kate Steinle?
How about the
Do you know
students
their
in the
names? Do you know their
schools who are being shot up every day? I don't see you talking about those people.
We addressed that. Governor Scott addressed that and changed the laws.
What has been done?
Trump didn't do anything.
Changed the laws in Florida.
Peter, I want to ask you about something, and I should note that you and I spoke about this early before the show, about the behind the scenes that you have, some insight into all of this. What are you hearing about the White House discussions on the border wall funding, specifically from that Wednesday meeting that was inside the Situation Room?
I just confirmed with my contact at Customs and Border Patrol that during the Wednesday meeting between the president and the Republican and Democratic leadership, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Nielsen, began a briefing on border security in which she claimed she had 98% coverage of a particular security tool. Unfortunately, the commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol had testified in the Senate a few weeks earlier that that number was actually 17%. When confronted with that reality, the commissioner had to confirm what he testified under oath to the Senate, and abruptly Trump canceled the briefing, and I'm told that the commissioner was roundly castigated for not lying to protect the Secretary of Homeland Security's lie.
That's sobering. So he was castigated for telling what he said was the factual truth.
That he had testified under oath before the Senate several weeks ago. So yes, lying is obviously unacceptable, but not uncommon in Washington. What struck me was how disorganized it was, that the fact that a leading member of her team, his testimony wasn't available to her, or she was unaware, which she should have been, that he had testified to the exact opposite of what she claimed in the hearing.
It is Monday, the 7th of January of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. And I just want to quickly thank you for your patience with this grief process I've been going through this past week, and which will be ongoing. It is going on right now. But activity and work is always good therapy. At least it has been for me, and I'm attempting to get back into the swing of things. So if you note a small quiver in my voice on occasion, it's because there's a small quiver in my voice. All right. I just want to say that I really do miss my son, and I was warmed by the outpouring of love from his friends and his fans, and a lot more, just so many more than I thought. A much larger fan base for his music. And I gotta say, his music, the lyrics could sometimes be a little rough. The music had a groove to it. I mean, yeah. But he was more than some of the rough parts of his lyrics, and a lot of his lyrics had a spiritual aspect and a mentoring aspect and a positive, honest, open-hearted aspect to the world, and that communicated, and people were touched by it, and that touched me. So unexpected. Looks like from evidence coming in now and what I found and speaking with his medical people and others that he's been having a heart issue for a while, and well, he didn't really go into depth with it with me or anybody else, and he lived life without regrets. And I have to say, it's hard to let go of a son or any child, but I'm not regretful about anything that was lacking. Yeah, I want more time. Of course, that's lacking. But, we didn't miss a hug. They were all meaningful. They weren't just cursory. What we spoke about and lessons learned and lessons imparted and memories to be held. And I like to think that, that's the way we should live our lives. Every moment is special. Okay, let's get on with what we're getting on with here. Well, that was Bardella at the top. And, of course, he used to write for Breitbart. And he used to be a Republican. And, cute girl McElhaney, she knows how to talk over people. But I always like how right-wingers and former right-wingers pretty much know how the game is played. And they just keep on. People like us, we'd pause and let them finish. Which they never do. And then when we speak, there's no time left for us. So, what is it about this administration and this GOP? Where was the concern for, the neo-Nazis killing cops? I haven't heard anything about that. And there are neo-Nazis killing cops. Neo-Nazis kill cops more than the so-called illegals. And we'll get into some of those numbers, too. Absolute lies about criminals coming across the border. Terrorists caught. What are they talking about? They're talking about lies. Okay, on the rest of the menu, in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays, an appeals court ruled 2-1 that claims against several state officials over the Flint, Michigan water contamination scandal can proceed. The Department of Justice came perilously close to admitting that it engaged in disinformation about immigrants and terrorism in a formal government report. Told you so. And William Penn is not the Quaker Oats guy. He is much more interesting than that. After the break, we then move to the chef's table, where Trump claimed that he can relate to federal workers who are working without pay since he stiffed so many over the years in his businesses. He has a personal experience with it. He knows exactly what they're going through, and he likes it. And WikiLeaks tells reporters 140 things not to say about Julian Assange. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, so do engage there. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the contribute button. If you could become a recurring Patreon to Netroots Radio, it will greatly offset the increased bills that we have for 2019. And it is, I should confess, direly needed. And thank you for those recent Patreons. I'll get to you in real soon. Just give me a little bit of time. I got some other things I need to take care of in real life. But I'll get back to you. And I do, and we at the station do so appreciate our new Patreons. You can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos, where I can be found as Justice Putnam. Also, the Justice Department. Look that up. I have that too, and it's all one. We're all kind of connected. It's so weird. All right, you can follow Netroots Radio on Facebook if you want, and we're on some other platforms as well. Okay, pick up podcasts of the show on by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, YouTube, iHeart, etc., etc., etc. I guess I should mention West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is on Twitter at Cookbook West. Like I said, I'll get back into the swing of things. All right, so let's start off with this first offering here on the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. It comes by way of Think Progress by Addie Baird. A lawsuit brought by residents of Flint, Michigan, who for months were supplied drinking water that was dangerously lead contaminated and bacteria-laden. Yeah, they had Legionnaire's disease, too. Well, that lawsuit can go forward. An appeals court has ruled. An appellate court on Friday, over the objections of some state and local officials, ruled that the federal lawsuit against the city and several Michigan state officials can proceed. The suit argues that Flint residents Sherry Gurton and her child, Diogenes Muse Cleveland, had their bodily integrity violated when they were exposed to lead-contaminated water without being warned by officials. See, government officials always use this strategy known as implied immunity. You know, you can't sue City Hall, all right? Implied immunity. So if they poison you, even for profit, they're immune from a lawsuit, civil or otherwise. Yet, there are people who are being criminally charged in this. All right. But, that was essentially their defense. So you can't sue us. You can't sue City Hall. I mean, yeah, we didn't tell people, but we're saving money. Claims against 5 other state employees were dismissed because the plaintiff's complaints alleges mere negligence and not a constitutional violation against them. The city of Flint, arguing that it is an arm of the state, claimed that it should be exempt from litigation under the 11th Amendment, which grants states immunity from being sued in federal court by individuals. But the court ruled the city does not have immunity and was acting as its own body. 4 years after the water crisis in Flint began, the Michigan residents still do not have fully clean water, and the crisis continues because that's what happens when Republicans take over. We become an asshole country every single time. And then, of course, to save it means that we're socialists. Have you noticed that Alexandria Ortega-Cortez is called like a commie, a socialist? Yeah, pretty much Eisenhower Republican as far as I can tell by policy. Jeez. But everybody called Eisenhower a commie anyway back in the day, like Birchers. A PBS Frontline investigation last year found that 119 people died of pneumonia, that's Legionnaire's disease, caused during that period of time, with many of those cases potentially linked to the Legionella bacteria. And last April, the state suddenly ended Flint's bottled water distribution program. Although the water quality has improved, it is not officially safe. In other words, it's not potable. And if it's not potable, I really don't want to be, washing my face in it either, if you know my drift. Now, newly elected Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is a Democrat, thank goodness, but they're trying to strip her of power, signed her first executive order last week in response to the crisis in Flint, requiring state employees to immediately report any public health or safety concerns to their bosses, unlike how it was in the previous administration. The Benjamin Wittes of Lawfare brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it looks like the case is closed because the Justice Department will not stand by its report on immigrants and terrorism. In other words, someone let them get sucked into a disinformation campaign and put out, we might call them illegal numbers. Well, they just came close to admitting that. And Wittes says perilously close because the department did not quite admit it. In fact, the letter sent to a group of people, including Wittes, who had raised concerns about a report the Justice Department published last January, announces that the department has concluded that the report should not be withdrawn or corrected, but the letter sent to them, to the group, including Wittes, of course, by Deputy Assistant General Michael H. Allen, also concedes that, quote, the report could be criticized by some readers consistent with some of the concerns presented. In other words, the facts were wrong. Some people call that a lie. Well, maybe. The report promised that the department will, the department also promised that they will follow the principles of an obscure law known as the Information Quality Act better in issuing future reports to better present such information to the public. This is about as close as the Trump administration is going to get to admitting that it used a formal government report to distort data to slime Muslims and immigrants. Now, let's back up and consider the whole story in context. It all began in February of 2017 when Trump told his lie during his first address to a joint session of Congress, in which he said that according to data provided by the Department of Justice, the vast majority of individuals convicted of terrorism and terrorism-related offenses since 9/11 came here from outside of our country. Well, as Wittes and Nora Ellickson and Lisa Daniels wrote, well, they were suspicious of the claim. So Ellickson and Daniels dug into the data. They discovered that the publicly available Justice Department data simply did not show the majority of terrorist or terrorist-related crimes were committed by people who came here from abroad. For one thing, this data set does not include domestic terrorism convictions, because domestic terrorism convictions are, mostly by white neo-Nazis. Can't have that. What's more, the list included almost 100 foreign-born defendants who were extradited into the U.S. and therefore never would have been affected by immigration policy. That is, even excluding domestic terrorism cases, it was possible to support the president's claim only if one counted as foreign-born terrorism suspects the U.S. had actively imported in order to prosecute for terrorism or terrorism-related crimes. Well, that's one way to fluff the numbers. You don't have enough foreign-born terrorists committing crimes? Bring them here and convict them here for crimes committed outside the U.S. And then tell people, drugs are coming across our southern border. No, they're not. They're coming out of the pharmacy. In downtown, whatever small town you're in, the drugs are coming from the goddamn pharmacy. But why let facts get in the way? And apparently the Department of Justice has said, we should let facts get in the way now, shouldn't we? Andrew Murphy of Eon brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Speaking of hash, William Penn was not the Quaker Oats guy. All right, let's be clear. He only looks like him. And I dare you, actually go up to any Trump member and just ask them, who were the authors of the Federalist Papers? They won't be able to tell you. William Penn wasn't one of them. I'm just letting you know. But there were three, yeah. Madison, Hamilton, and Jay. But they don't know that. They don't know the basics of what it is that makes us America. Really, the basics. They know a small fingernail amount. Not even that, to be honest with you. And so don't even ask them, who wrote Federalist 10 and what that's about. Or Federalist 45. They'll have no idea. Well, this year marks the 300th anniversary of the death of William Penn. For someone with such a prominent name, he remains a little known and much misunderstood figure. Iconic representations abound, of course, none more prominent than the 37-foot bronze statue atop Philadelphia City Hall. In that rendering, decked out in lace cuffs and holding his colonial charter, Penn looks every bit the far-seeing visionary founder. Many assume that the familiar face on the Quaker Oats box, with its peaceful mien and slightly bemused smile beckoning the viewer to a healthy breakfast, is Penn. And then there is the portly older Penn, wearing a serious expression, a scowl almost, and a vest that seems barely to button around his midsection. Well, that's what happens when you load up on too many oats, maybe. There are others, of course, including the images of Penn meeting with Lenny Lenape under the Treaty Elm at Shackamaxon, which both reflected and reinforced Pennsylvania's powerful founding mythos, differentiating Penn's just treatment of natives from the violence countenanced by other colonial founders. But how much do we really know about Penn? The meeting under the Treaty Elm probably never happened, and neither the City Hall statue nor the Rotund Elder, and certainly not the Quaker Oats label, give any sense to the drama of Penn's life, the heady successes and crushing failures, his grand vision, and his tendency to self-pity and grudge-holding. Well, just like an American. Penn was a man of paradoxical qualities. He espoused a radically egalitarian Quaker theology, insisting that something divine resided within each individual, yet he owned slaves on his American estate. He praised representative institutions such as Parliament and the jury system, but spent years in hiding for his loyalty to an absolutist king. "I am like to be an adopted American," he wrote shortly after arriving in Pennsylvania in 1682, but spent only 4 of his remaining 36 years there and was chronically incapable of managing money, spending 8 months in an English debtor's prison in his 60s, even while his colony quickly became a commercial success. Born in 1644, Penn was groomed by his father, a naval hero who owned thousands of acres and expropriated Irish land for a life of privilege and influence. Well, of course, if you take land from the Irish, you're going to get rich. It's a business model back in the day, probably still is now. That plan suffered its first setback when a teenage William was sent home from the University of Oxford, training ground for England's elite, of course, for religious nonconformity. But it really collapsed when Penn had a profound spiritual transformation in Ireland in 1667, joining the Quakers, also known as the Society of Friends, one of the most radical and unpopular sects around. His faith cost the elder Penn 4 imprisonments. I'm sorry, actually it was William Penn, spent 4 imprisonments while still in his 20s, and his father kicked him out of the family because of his conversion. But as one door closed, another opened, and Penn soon became one of the best-known religious dissenters in England, Over the course of the 1670s, he traveled throughout England and across Europe, spreading the Quaker message and advocating liberty of conscience in dozens of publications and in appeals to political authorities. By the end of the decade, as a political crisis gripped England and Quakers faced continuing persecution, Penn hit upon a new idea, an American colony that might offer a kind of holy experiment, perhaps even grow to the seed of a nation, where adherents of many religions might live in peace, mutually committed to each other's welfare even as they worshipped as they saw fit. He parlayed a debt from the crown into a massive American land grant, named it for his father, or perhaps himself, and sailed for America in 1682. Penn's was not the only settlement offering a measure of respite from the religious strife roiling Europe, but he was an especially prominent figure, charismatic and well-connected, and thousands of settlers made their way to a settlement during the 1680s. Now, Penn remained in the colony for 2 years, 1682 to 84, enthusiastically overseeing the business of founding, but before long, he encountered the proverbial fly in the ointment, in the person of Charles Calvert, otherwise known as Lord Baltimore, his southern neighbor. Conflict over control of what were then known as the lower counties, the present-day U.S. state of Delaware, actually now, lay at the heart of the dispute. By 1684, both men had returned to London to argue their cases in person. Penn emerged victorious, but instead of returning to America, he opted, in what he has called the greatest mistake of his life, to stay in England, where he had an old friend in the new king, James II. Aided by Penn, James embarked on an ambitious effort to do away with persecutory legislation and enact liberty of conscience by bypassing Parliament and ruling by royal decree. It was an extremely controversial campaign that came crashing down when William of Orange invaded England in 1688 and James was ejected from the throne, and Penn likely saw nothing glorious in that revolution. Well, now James was fortunate to flee to France, but Penn was not so lucky, and imprisonments on suspicion of treason followed, along with years in hiding and temporary loss of control over Pennsylvania. The next 5 years were a low point, and only in 1699 did he make his long-delayed return to Pennsylvania. But it was hardly the same place, and he was not the same man. After a second and final departure from Pennsylvania, Penn's life was a series of struggles to maintain control of his colony, remain relevant in English politics, and get his ever-problematic finances in order. He was not entirely successful on any of these fronts, spending much of 1708 in debtor's prison, ultimately deciding to sell the government of Pennsylvania back to the crown in return for a cash payment. And even this promising financial windfall would prove elusive, as he suffered a debilitating stroke in 1712, was incapacitated for the remaining years of his life, and he died in 1718, was buried on the grounds of Jordan's Meeting House about 30 miles west of London. Well, now it is surely no accident that just 5 years after Penn's death, a young freethinker named Benjamin Franklin found a congenial home in Philadelphia. Penn might tower over Philadelphia from the top of City Hall, but Franklin surely remains the city's most famous resident. Yet, Franklin's career is difficult to imagine without Penn's foundational work, envisioning a settlement in which one's civic status did not depend on one's religious affiliation. In 1984, Ronald Reagan honored Penn and his second wife, Hannah, with posthumous honorary American citizenship, a little late perhaps, but still a recognition of Penn's contribution. And for the record, that jolly face on the Quaker Oats box, company officials insist that it belongs to someone called Larry, who has nothing to do with William Penn. All right, let's get to our break, and when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, and yet so far. When Peter Jackson and his wife Fran Walsh and their producing and writing partner Philip Aboyans settled down to make movies out of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they had one big thing on their side: J.R.R. Tolkien. Specifically, they had 3 books that were large, but that had a very focused quest with distinct conflict milestones attached to it. Plus, they featured a compact world that was easy to understand with simple, relatable characters working from clear drives. Sure, they needed to condense a lot, but the core was solid enough for them to build one of cinema's epic masterpieces onto it. In contrast, Philip Reeves' YA novel, Mortal Engines, the first book in a 4-book series, is a different beast. Though a multiple award winner, and not as long as a single Lord of the Rings, it provides a great challenge for adaptation. In order to turn 2 parts and 320 pages into a 2-hour movie, our intrepid trio had to eliminate the second half of Part 1 and rearrange Part 2 to make up for having promoted a secondary character to the main villain, having created a love story, and having simplified the solution to stopping the big kill machine through the introduction of a sadly convenient MacGuffin, which puts so much focus on one character that it's not clear ultimately whose story it is. On top of all that, the world is rich and complex, but foreign enough to require time and explanations, neither of which our trio has the luxury of having. The result is a really gorgeous-looking movie produced by dedicated and talented people with many nice moments that don't coalesce, and in the end don't deliver the emotional payoff that the filmmakers so desperately want to have. It's really sad because so much good work went into this movie, and you can feel how much everyone wants this film to be the movie that it isn't. It's certainly worth a watch, but watch it with a forgiving eye and a thought to what it could have been. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata.
When wildfires rip through a landscape, firefighters have the first and most immediate job. But then, that burned moonscape often passes into the hands of restoration ecologists, who yank out invasive species and plant native seedlings in their place.
And we try to artificially give a start to these communities that should resemble the communities that were there prior to the disturbance.
Matteo Garbellato, a plant pathologist at UC Berkeley. The problem, he says, is that microscopic killers sometimes hitchhike on native seedlings grown in nurseries, and that's happened at restoration sites in the San Francisco Bay Area, where restorers hoped that nursery-grown natives called toyones and sticky monkey flowers could be reintroduced.
Plant ecologists were looking at them and thinking, oh, why are these toyons dying here? Or why are these sticky monkey flowers dying in large numbers in this restoration site? So it happens that each one of those plant species was reintroduced in a restoration effort, and it had one or sometimes multiple of these pathogens that belong to the genus Phytophthora, which incidentally is the same genus of the pathogen that causes sudden death, and it's also the same genus of the pathogen that caused the Irish potato famine.
Garbellato and his colleagues surveyed 5 native plant nurseries for the Phytophthora pathogen and found that more than a quarter of the plants sampled were infected. They also discovered in separate work that a common chemical used to suppress the pathogen in nurseries can actually breed resistance.
The passage of these strains through these production facilities, sometimes it can make them more aggressive.
They reported their work in the journals PLOS ONE and Plant Pathology. But there is a solution to root out these invisible killers. A year-long regimen of stricter sanitation at native plant nurseries, like pasteurizing pots and soil, appeared to eliminate the pathogen. And disease-free seedlings means damaged landscapes have a better chance at bouncing back.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Welcome to Scientific American Science Talk, posted on January 3rd, 2019. Happy New Year! I'm Steve Mirsky. Ultima Thule. It's the little snowman-shaped Kuiper Belt object that the New Horizons mission flew by on January 1st. We'll be receiving info about Ultima Thule from the spacecraft for the next 20 months or so, and there's plenty of coverage about the mission and the object on our site and all over the web. So for this short edition of Science Talk, I want to focus on the deep time aspect of Ultima Thule and on us. On New Year's Eve, the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory hosted a few short talks about the latest stop for the New Horizons mission. The speakers were all space people, with the exception of Kenneth Lacovara, who's a paleontologist based at Rowan University in New Jersey. Lacovara has found the remains of some of the largest known dinosaurs, including Dreadnoughtus, which weighed in at about 65 tons. Its femur is as tall as an NBA shooting guard. So there's no dinosaur fossils to be found on Ultima Thule. What does Lacovara have to tell us? Well, he gave a brief talk for the webcast on New Year's Eve that puts the study of Ultima Thule in a somewhat different context than we may usually think about space missions. I happen to be watching live, and I grabbed the audio to share with you. Enjoy.
Thank you, Alan Stern and the New Horizons team for having me. This will be a night to remember. You know, the past is out there. It's beneath our feet and in the heavens above. And we can learn from it. We should learn from it. The further back you look, the further ahead you will see, Winston Churchill said. Indeed, we would all like to have access to the future, but that's impossible. It's only the past that gives us predictive insight into what the future may hold. It's the past that is our guide. Who are we? Where did we come from? What is our place in space and time? These are the fundamental questions of the human condition that transcend culture and generations. We can gain insight into these monumental existential questions by traveling through time into the Earth's crust, excavating the rocks and the bones of the many past worlds that have been our Earth. Or we can travel to the furthest shores of our solar system and meet the past as it lies preserved in the darkest, iciest outposts of our star's domain. The New Horizons space probe rendezvous with Ultima Thule culminates tonight. In a poignant moment in the evolution of exploration, as it encounters this ancient, mysterious Voyager, New Horizons will transform from a journey into space into the journey into the depths of deep time. Like a fossil in the sky, Ultima Thule survives as a remnant of the earliest moments of our solar system. Frozen and pristine, it bears everlasting witness to both the cataclysms and the slow-motion workings of worlds that have shaped the retinue of planets beneath. Ultima Thule once shared the solar system with an Earth devoid of any living thing, a planet boiled and sterilized by incessant cosmic bombardment. When the worst of it ended, life grabbed hold and never let go. For 3 billion years, Ultima Thule circled the sun while nothing more complex than clumps of microbes agitated in our planet's primordial ocean. It was out there, floating in space, when cells on Earth began to cooperate, building bodies and grouping themselves into tissues. It arced through Cambrian skies when the major branches of the tree of life emerged from our common stock. And when the lobe-finned fish climbed out from the seas, it was there, tracing endless ellipses in the void. There, moving, always moving, silently above when the dinosaurs were new and could terrorize nothing bigger than a bug. There in the sky, over every muddy Spinosaurus, every quarrelsome velociraptor, every bloodthirsty T-Rex, and there, unbeknownst to every insatiable Dreadnoughtus. when the reign of the dinosaurs came crashing down in a cosmic accident, it was there to witness the rise of the mammals and the ascent of the apes, through which our solar system became aware of itself. And now, after a long prelude, we twins of the same womb, to borrow a phrase from the poet Marge Piercy, the apes of Earth and Ultima Thule are set to meet in a most improbable rendezvous. Tonight, like a paleontologist revealing a dinosaur bone and linking its existence to our own, New Horizons will drill into our ancient past as it flies by this tiny frozen world and will glimpse a fossilized moment in time, a moment that led to the coalescence of our planets, to the transformation of geology into biology, and the evolution of spectacular and improbable creatures such as dinosaurs and ourselves. From this lonely vantage point near the ends of our solar systems, New Horizons will offer the world the humbling perspective that only deep time and deep space can provide as it digs like a pickaxe in the sky into our wondrous past. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks to the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and to Ken Lacavara for greenlighting my use of their audio. We'll be back in a few days with a more traditional episode of Science Talk. Till then, check out www.scientificamerican.com for our continuing coverage of the New Horizons mission and for all your science news. And follow us on Twitter, where you get a tweet whenever a new item hits the website. Our Twitter name is @SciAm. For Scientific American Science Talk, I'm Steve Mirsky. Thanks for clicking on us.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. American and Chinese officials will meet in Beijing Monday for trade talks less than 2 months before a deadline to end a trade war or see a harsh round of tariffs enter force. Those meetings will be the first since President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed in December to postpone the new tariffs by 3 months. Since then, both the U.S. stock market and the Chinese economy have shown signs of strain.
Xi Jinping's under a fair amount of pressure.
Claude Barfield is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute.
Growth is slowing, investment coming into China is slowing, and the wages are rising, so there are other countries that are now more competitive.
Stakes are clearly high, but it's not clear how the U.S. and China hope to settle the trade war, not least since President Trump's negotiating team remains internally divided.
Some of them would like to just sort of allow the Chinese to buy us off with a few more bushels of soybeans and wheat and cattle, et cetera, et cetera. Others think that we should push for deeper reforms.
Those reforms could include protections for foreign companies who say China steals their trade secrets in exchange for granting market access. Rafiq Dassani directs the RAND Corporation's Center for Asia-Pacific Policy and says reforms of that sort are unlikely as long as China remains a technology borrower. And while that will change as China prioritizes guarding its own intellectual property, the country isn't there yet.
It might need another 4 or 5 years before it becomes a very active proponent of strong intellectual property rights. But I think it'll be willing to make some changes to at least appease or give the appearance of doing something.
Barfield says that distinction between actions and appearances matters.
In 2015, Xi Jinping personally promised President Obama that they would not use espionage to transfer intellectual property and trade secrets to their public-private corporations. And what we've seen is that after a small downtick in the first 6 months, it's really come roaring back.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We're going a little long on a lot of things, but bear with me. I'm trying to deal. All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's weather stations that they planted, but we always start weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River. In the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States, where it is currently 35 degrees. We are expected to have a high of about 42 and an overnight low of around the mid-30s. And we did have a little bit of snow floating down yesterday, and in the upper elevations, there was indeed snow because we are currently in a winter weather advisory. At elevation, I don't know, maybe about 800 feet lower than where freezing is right now, where they're getting copious amounts of snow. We're right at the moment only with a bit of rain, though showers will be occurring today, as they have been occurring. Looks like we will be getting close to a quarter of an inch today and another quarter inch overnight. Winds are out of the southeast right now, but will be shifting in about an hour or two out of the east-southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And will continue out of that direction and at that clip for the next few days. Let's see. Pollen is rated as none. Air quality index is in the moderate range at 52 parts per million. Not really good for those with breathing problems. And the daytime UV index is rated low at 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.86 inches. Visibility is down to 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 85%. And now weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted. These purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 51 and cloudy. Paris is 46 and cloudy. Rome is 53 and fair. Kiev is 19 degrees with light snow. Kabul is 34 degrees with smoke. Hong Kong is 63 degrees and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 39 degrees and fair, but with a winter advisory of their own. Sydney, Australia is 73 degrees and mostly cloudy because it's summer for them. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 28 degrees Fahrenheit and fair as New York in January can be. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. First amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays is out of Alternate by Gwendolyn Smith, who works for the new Civil Rights Movement and writes there. Speaking to reporters at the White House yesterday, Trump claimed that he can relate to federal workers who are working without pay during the current government shutdown. And he added that those same workers agree with the shutdown, even though they are not being paid as a result of it. And of course, the only people agreeing with him in any tacit sort of way would be those skinhead neo-Nazis that were at that press conference with him. Oh, yeah. They'll work without pay because they're getting all sorts of money that they're confiscating from refugees trying to make it here. Do you think that's not happening? Just look at those guys. They're thugs. And Trump absolutely knows what it's like for those workers to go without a paycheck. He routinely would not pay people who work for him. Subcontractors routinely would think that it was the greatest thing in the world. I'm working for Donald Trump. And then he wouldn't pay, and their 30, 40-year-old business would go out of business. That is the legacy of Donald Trump.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Finishing up here, and the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article out of Reuters. Dateline London, WikiLeaks on Sunday advised journalists not to report 140 different false and defamatory statements about its founder, Julian Assange, who has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since June of 2012. Well, that's transparency. It was not immediately clear what prompted the advice to media organizations, probably because he's being extradited, I would say. But WikiLeaks singled out Britain's Guardian newspaper for publishing what it said was a false report about Assange, and the Guardian did not immediately respond late on Sunday to Reuters for comment. Now, Reuters had requested that comment, of course. The Australian set up WikiLeaks as a channel for publishing confidential information from anonymous sources. He is a hero to some, was a hero to many, now only a hero to some, for exposing what supporters cast as government abuse of power and for championing free speech. But to others, he is a rebel who has undermined the security of the United States. WikiLeaks angered Washington by publishing hundreds of thousands of secret U.S. diplomatic cables that laid bare often highly critical U.S. appraisals of world leaders from Putin to members of the Saudi royal family. Now, the 5,000-word email included 140 statements that WikiLeaks said were false and defamatory, such as the assertion that Assange had been an agent or officer of any intelligence service. Because he's on his own. He's really just a mercenary for hire, don't you think? All right, we better get out of here, and we will meet up tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Netroots Radio is back on schedule. Also, thank you for your patience on that. And it does. Netroots Radio does broadcast 24/7, 365. And do stay tuned to that. We'll meet up with you tomorrow right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.